So welcome back to those of you who would have been with us yesterday on our webinar. I'm sure you guys got a wealth of information from us. Today on our webinar, we're going to be actually talking about business as usual, but with a twist. And with us today, our presenter will be none other than Mrs. Sheena Mears Granville. Sheena Mears Granville is our Executive Director of the Barbados Employers Confederation. She's the first female to hold this position. Sheena is a human resource and industrial relations professional with over 10 years of experience, who is dedicated to the pursuit of excellence. Her passion for people development and is pursued through teaching in the Executive Diploma Program at Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business. Sheena's diverse portfolio of projects includes conducting labor market research, writing newspaper and magazine articles, chairing tripartite committees and preparing guidance on various labor issues and leading organizational development initiatives. So please help me to welcome Ms. Sheena Mears Granville. Our layout for today will go as follows. Sheena will be covering the areas of providing quality service in a rapid shifting environment, shifting mindset, identifying strengths, and redeploying resources. After she's finished with her presentation, we will go right into question and answer. So Sheena, right over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Over the last few days, we've discussed a few things on this webinar series. We looked at remote work, we looked at health and safety. This morning now we're looking at how do we continue to provide service in the rapidly changing environment. So I'm going to share a presentation with you. So I'm going to share my screen as we go through the discussion this morning. Okay, can you guys confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, Sheena, I can see your screen.
Okay. So this morning is business as usual, but with a twist. So I'm sure most persons know this name, Blockbuster. So while Netflix was shipping out DVDs to consumers' homes, Blockbuster figured that their physical stores were enough to please their customers. In the year 2000, 20 years ago now, Netflix approached Blockbuster with an offer to sell their company for $50 million US. The Blockbuster CEO was not interested in the offer because he thought it was a very small niche business and it was losing money at the time. By 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy, and Netflix, we all know Netflix, which had to slow down streaming this week so that we wouldn't break the internet, is now a $28 billion company. Another story of a product that we know of historically. At one time, the world's biggest film company was Kodak. But it did not keep up with the digital revolution because it was afraid of cannibalizing its existing product lines. So Steve Sasson, the Kodak engineer, actually invented the first digital camera back in 1975. But it was filmless, and we know Kodak for film. So management's reaction was, that's cute, but don't tell anyone about it. You see, the leaders of Kodak failed to see digital photography as a disruptive technology. So now, we don't hear about Kodak the way how it was before. Another big name that is not so big anymore. I know many of you will recognize that phone, the Nokia phone. When cell phones first became very accessible and popular, almost everyone had a Nokia phone. and Nokia created the first cellular network. However, their mistake was that they didn't want to lead the drastic change in user experience. So by the time Nokia caught up with what was happening in the market, there was BlackBerry, there was iPhone with its keyless phone, with no keypad, and Nokia was just left in the dust. And it went from being the phone that everyone had to not being a major player in the market at all. So I start with these stories to just highlight that businesses have to deal with change, and they've always had to deal with change. Change is disruptive. Change brings about, it makes us just completely look at what we are doing and looking at it from different angles. It forces us to, it just upturns our entire lives sometimes. So it can be very disruptive. Change is also hard work. So there's nothing easy about change. It's something that you really have to put your mind to and actually go about pursuing it. But change can also be both big and small, because very often when we think about change, we think of this massive revolutionary change, but sometimes change happens in small increments and can make a huge difference on an organization. So I just wanted us to remember that change is not, it happens in a very dynamic way, and it can happen in increments, it can happen all at once, but it is hard work and it forces you to think about what you are doing. Now, change is nothing new to the world of work, and over the past few years, we've had some drivers that were changing how we went about work. So there have been some changes in work paradigms. This was being pushed by the need for work-life balance. So many persons wanted to have a balance between life and work, and we saw persons advocating to have telework. We saw the rise in work from home. We saw the rise in the gig economy, so people taking on jobs to work as opposed to being contracted to work for 40 hours with a company. The digital economy was another thing that was driving change. So we have all of these digital platforms coming out, and it changed the way we did business. Just think about it. A couple years ago, there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, we didn't have social media influencers. That was not a job, that was not a thing. There was no Uber, so persons did not use an app and could map out and get a cost of their taxi before they requested a ride. So the digital economy has been driving change in how we do work. Then the 24/7 economy, that was another driver of change. So persons wanted the ability when they at midnight to be able to do business. And that tied a lot to the digital economy, because persons necessarily did not want to go out to do their shopping at midnight. But if they could go and use a platform like Amazon and do their grocery shopping and have it delivered to their home the next day or the next 2 days, then that was easy for them. And having that 24-hour access, the need for that is what was driving changes in work, in the world of work as we knew it. But we know that change is inevitable. So now, between December and now, we have a major force driving us to change the way we do work, and that is COVID-19. COVID-19 is forcing us to reconsider how we can deliver our services. How can we deliver in alternative ways? And weren't we doing this already? If we were, I'm sure some of the previous drivers I mentioned, there were the influencers for why we were looking at how we could deliver our services in a different way. And if we were not doing that before, certainly the pandemic is forcing us to relook how we do business. And the reality is the companies that survive are the ones that embrace change and embrace the challenge that it brings. And I highlighted just some famous, well-known examples earlier, but companies that embrace change are the ones that are going to survive. So this morning, we're talking a bit about how do you embrace that change so that your companies can survive through the pandemic and also continue to thrive afterward. So the starting point has to be considering why you exist as a business, as a company. So you're not a lawyer. What you actually do is you provide legal services. So think about what is the reason for existence. Not a doctor, you provide medical services. You're not a store. You don't just have a store. What do? You exist because you provide fashionable clothing for a niche market. So we have to start thinking about what is the reason for your existence. If I take the Barbados Employers Confederation as an example, we exist as a membership organization, so we can provide human resources and industrial relations support. So what is it that you exist for? So when you come to the core and go back to first principles of what you exist for, then the form of delivery will adapt to changing circumstances, but you remain at first principles considering what is your reason for existence. Considering how you deliver on your purpose. So you're in retail. Retailers, you need to have stock. So you consider how can you improve the quality of that stock in terms of price and desirability. How else do you deliver on your purpose? Customers need to see that stock so that they can purchase it, right? So how can you do this more efficiently? How can you embrace technology to ensure that the customers get to see your stock? So are you going to use a web platform? Are you going to use personal sellers? What is your methodology for getting customers to see what you have to offer? Then you have to collect money. You have to exchange money when you do a sale, when your customers make a purchase. So what is the best way to do it? If you've always operated a cash operation, it's not about the cash, it's about receiving money. So can you do this via debit card, via credit card? Can you do this via online banking? The focus is how do I receive money, not necessarily how do I get cash. So once again, you have to start thinking about how can I deliver on my purpose using different modalities that might best suit my customer base. And that's where our mindset needs to shift to. Now, for many businesses at this point in time, you are trying to manage the pandemic, look after the health and safety of your employees. You're trying to ensure that you can still continue as a business to deliver on that purpose. And so in essence, you might be performing CPR. So just some fun facts. When you are performing CPR, did you know that they tell you if you're learning CPR that if you want to keep rhythm, then you sing the song Staying Alive. I'm a terrible singer. So that song that goes, ha, 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 staying alive, that helps you to keep the rhythm of the compressions. Now they tell you that you can do CPR hands only. Before it was the hands and the breaths, but now they're saying you can do hands only CPR. And once you start CPR, you are not supposed to stop. You can only stop when someone else can take over from you. So once you start, you can't stop. So how do you perform CPR? And I'm saying according to the internet, I was trained in CPR. However, I've not actually had to do it. So when you're performing CPR, the first thing they tell you is to assess the situation. You have to act with urgency and do not stop. So when we relate that to our businesses and what we're dealing with right now, you have to first assess the situation. So my question to you this morning would be, if you're assessing the situation, is your company dead or alive? And I ask that for you to consider two things. Think about an organism versus a mechanism. Now, an organism is a living thing. It is resilient, it is adaptive. It makes adjustments to its environment. Now, think about us human beings as organisms. If someone loses a limb, the other one will strengthen to compensate. If you lose one of your senses, then persons report that they have heightened awareness from their other senses as it compensates for the loss. So organisms, living beings, are resilient and adaptive by nature. We are seeing this with COVID-19 virus right now. It is resilient and it's doing its best to survive, jumping from person to person. So organisms are resilient and adaptive. When we think about a mechanism now, a piece of machinery, a mechanism is a finely tuned instrument. It's not alive, it's not a living thing, but it is capable of complex activity. But guess what? If you have a finely tuned mechanism that can work perfectly and it can deliver exceptional results, if one thing in that mechanism goes, the entire system shuts down. A mechanism is by nature not very adaptive. All of the parts need to work in cohesion for it to deliver on its function. I want to suggest to us that our organizations need to be organisms. They need to be resilient, they need to be adaptive. It can't just be a finely tuned mechanism, because if one thing goes, then we grind to a halt. Is your company dead or alive? Unfortunately, some of our companies are dying, because if one thing stops, we are grinding to a halt. And we need to start building some more resilience in our organizations. We're talking about changing circumstances right now, and we know that another thing that is affecting businesses would be climate change. And we know climate change is very real. The air temperatures over land are increasing. Air temperatures over the oceans, they are rising. The Arctic ice is decreasing. Ocean heat content is increasing. Barbados, we are getting heat waves. Last year, a hurricane stood still for 24 hours over the Grand Bahama. So things are changing. And in this changing climate, we have to operate. And for our organizations to be resilient, to be adaptive, we need our people to be resilient and adaptive. But unfortunately, some of us have some climate refugees within our organizations. So when I say a climate refugee, what am I talking about? So a climate refugee, those are persons who are forced to leave their home due to sudden or long-term change, which compromises their well-being or their livelihood. So on Earth, in the world, we have some persons who are being forced out of their homes because of the changing climate. In our organizations, we have to stop and consider, are persons forced to leave us because of harsh conditions where they believe they don't have a livelihood? And that is something to think about, because if our best persons, our best employees, our movers and shakers, our thinkers, feel as though the climate within our organization is too harsh and they're not going to survive and they're leaving, then that is a challenge for organizations in terms of brain drain, in terms of being adaptable, in terms of having persons who are innovative and able to give ideas. And I'll give you an example pulled from the sporting world. So in football, some players have their own tactical analysts. So they don't wait on the team, they have their individual tactical analysts who help them with their personal development. And when they develop, then obviously they're ripe for the picking elsewhere, or they get to leave their club or who they're affiliated with. And I want to put it out there that your best employees are not waiting on you to get it right. They're empowering themselves, they're retooling themselves, and when the opportunity comes, they're going to say, well, I'm a climate refugee, this is a harsh climate, I'm looking for somewhere else to go. And that is a concern for organizations as they want to build up their human resource capacity. So the world of work is changing, and tenure that's been in decline for a while, so persons are spending less and less time within an organization. The expectations are changing. So persons' expectations in terms of flexibility, in terms of upward mobility, in terms of multitasking, those things are changing. The types of jobs people want, that's been changing. What is the just transition? Now, there's this concept that as we transition our businesses, that it needs to be policy coherence. We need to do this in line with environmental factors, etc. So even the considerations for businesses, those are changing. The LGBT, and I'm not being disparaging here, but we started out with LGBT, and then there was a Q added on, and there was an I. So even that concept is changing in terms of embracing them within the workplace, within our society. The helicopter parents, so the employees you might have hired 20 years ago might not have had helicopter parents who would call you to find out if the young person was successful in getting their first job. But nowadays, we have parents who would call an HR department to find out if their charge was successful. So even how you interact with your employees, that has changed because of that. Then we have not the millennials, they're not the new kids on the block anymore. We have the iGeners. So now under COVID-19, I am seeing posts where millennials are saying we are not the ones who are still outside, it's the iGeners, the ones after us who are outside. And that brings to the fore the fact that we now have, in some workplaces, 5 different generations with 5 different preferences for communication and 5 different ways in which they view the world operating within the same space. So managing that conflict, that potential conflict within our organizations is becoming important. So the world of work is changing and it's evolving. So when we as businesses, when we have to assess our situation, talking about the first thing you have to do in CPR, you have to acknowledge the changing nature of work and what is happening around us. The second thing that we have to do when we are performing CPR is to act with urgency. Now, sometimes we are hampered by what we've done in the past and what we know from the past. So think about Kodak for a moment. Kodak would have invested a lot of money in making film. They were a leader in the film industry. So when they saw this new technology on the block, that they actually developed their engineer developed the first digital camera, but they knew film was their cash. Why would I want to interfere with my cash? But the truth is, economists understand this concept of sunken costs. So I've spent this money on this thing already. When I'm looking at opportunities around me, I can't look at the cost that I've invested in this particular piece of machinery and just hold on to it because you spent the money. You have to know, well, that is cost that is not recoverable if I move on, but I have to look at my environment to see what is happening. And even if it's disruptive technology, what can I do to my business and how can I capitalize on it? So we have to understand the need to act urgently, but also know when something is going to be disruptive and there are costs that we have to disregard in making a business decision. We can't just hold on to something because it's what we're comfortable with or it's because what we know. We have to go back to those first principles I identified, looking at what is your reason for being, and then if you have to look at different modalities, start to examine those. So some concepts to embrace in terms of acting with urgency: autonomy, personalization, flexible work cultures, diversity, and I'll talk a bit about communication and WhatsApp over Outlook, and just Google it. That's the thing. So we have to give more autonomy or self-direction to employees, and this has been going on for years. The fact of the matter is, who has the time to micromanage? Things are moving rapidly, and therefore giving employees a certain level of autonomy or we have focused on one side. There are times we have to make a shift to individual needs and capabilities and consider that, which can be difficult, but it's something that we have to consider. So I'll give you an example. Usually when we think of onboarding a candidate, you think about telling the person about what you do within your organization, or this is how we do it. We're going to have to start shifting our thought processes to maybe, what can you learn from this new employee? What have they seen from outside of your organization that can improve your organization? So starting to have that shift in focus. When we traditionally thought about diversity, it was all about age diversity and males and females within the organization. But even diversity is diversifying. So the LGBTQIA, diversity in terms of generational affiliation, diversity in terms of educational levels. So traditionally we think about education and we think we want the person who has a graduate from a university, but now we're seeing the rise of TVET education, Tech Voc, and sometimes you might have your best employees might not be university graduates. So having diversity in terms of educational levels, and definitely at this point in time, diversity in terms of geographic location. Persons are working remotely, working from home, working from different countries, and diversity within itself lends a company to better respond to the market because there are divergent thoughts which can aid you in seeing what's happening in the market and being able to respond. Flexible work cultures, so flexible schedules, work-life balance, those are no longer considered perks or lavish add-ons. For some organizations, they're fundamental to recruiting the persons that you want. But it also affords many types of businesses the flexibility for workers to work alternative schedules, so you can have longer opening hours because persons have flexible work hours. You can expand your team, so you don't only have to think about having extra physical space, but you can employ resources because you can have some flexibility there. WhatsApp over Outlook. So the truth is, teams are going to naturally gravitate to the easiest communication method for them. And I know many persons suffer from email overload, and sometimes searching through the emails can become a bit of a task. So I'm not saying that necessarily you need to use WhatsApp, but I'm saying you need to make sure that within your organization, you have an easy and efficient method of communication. And technology can aid in that. There are quite a few things that can aid you with communication within your organization. What we expect now in the workplace would be persons who can problem solve, persons who use their intuition and go out to look for solutions to questions that they have. So, you got a problem? Google it. The truth is, employees are now expected, and you should, there's nothing wrong with expecting this from your employees, expecting them to problem solve, expecting them to know how to navigate the digital environment. I'm not saying that you don't offer them help when they can't, but when we're talking about giving persons some autonomy and some discretion, persons also need to show some initiative in terms of finding problems, solving problems. So as a leader within your organization, there are some things that you have to look at when we are talking about change and embracing change. Give yourself the permission to imagine. Positive change can only happen when you allow yourself to imagine a better future for yourself, your customers, your company, and in some instances, even the world. You have to be able to visualize what positive change can look like. And in the quest for change, there will be two types of people you encounter. The goalkeepers, they're the ones who keep their eyes on the prize. They're focused on the goals of the organization and the end result, and they help you to accomplish those goals. But there are also persons who will be the gatekeepers. So they're the guardians of the status quo. What you need to be is to ensure you're a goalkeeper and not a gatekeeper. So it's not about protecting the status quo. It's about having a vision for where you see the company going and considering how you can look and review and change perspective to see how you can deliver on the company's objective. Look ahead and look for opportunity. Seek out your opportunity. Most leaders view that as the role of senior executives. So you believe the chairman, the senior management team, they're the ones who are supposed to be looking for opportunity. However, to infuse change agility into your culture, you have to embrace everyone. So that includes your midline managers, your frontline leaders, your supervisors, your employees who are closest to the market and to the customers and your daily operations. You need to find a way to encourage them and incentivize them to see opportunities in what they do on a daily basis. Seeing opportunity is not only the purview of your senior management. You have to provide a space to experiment. So I'm not saying that everything and anything goes, but when there's a potential opportunity, allow individuals or groups to experiment with ways to take advantage of it. So it could be something very simple. How do you experiment with a curbside or drive-through service? Now, that is not something that might call for major investment, but how can you potentially experiment to see how that can work for you? Minimize the need for multiple layers of sign-off, because you know what? That makes the culture too risk-averse and it quelches momentum. It squashes it. So if you need to go 5 tiers up, the likelihood of getting a no or don't start makes persons think it doesn't make any sense me even suggesting anything. And I will say, stop saying no. Once again, I'm not saying any and everything goes, but sometimes instead of saying no, ask the person to consider some of the factors that you might be thinking of that might make you say no. So asking, what do we do about X? What do we do about this scenario if it were to present? and let the person think about it and see if they come up with potential solutions. So if we say no to everything, then we squash that initiative within our organizations. Another tip, or let me ask this question. Whoever bought the perfect good that never made it to market? Whoever bought the perfect good that never made it to market? No one. Do not be paralyzed in the pursuit for perfection. Once again, I'm not saying to accept mediocrity. It's not about that. But sometimes we get bogged down into the details and we agonize over getting perfection, and we take too long and we miss the opportunity. There's sometimes that you need to go with the flow, and as things arise, you huddle and you look to solve that problem and you go again. That is going to allow you to seize your opportunities. So successful change agile leaders at all levels in the organization respond to change in the business environment by seizing opportunities, including throwing out old models and developing new ways of doing business. Try to make change thinking contagious, embedded it into everything they do, from the most fundamental daily interactions to the most complex strategy. And in order to seize your opportunities, you have to bring along your team. You can't do it alone. And to bring along your team, you have to share a compelling and a clear purpose. Communication is going to be key on this. Change agility requires an answer to the question, why? Why are we doing this? So people can fight the natural instinct to resist change. The answer needs to tap into what's meaningful and important, providing an irresistible invitation to come along with me. And finally, what was the last thing I said about CPR? You can't stop. Do not stop. You have to make the change happen. A vision is worthless unless it can be acted upon. So that's the end of my sharing in terms of trying to infuse adaptability within your organization. In the absence of questions, maybe you guys can give me some feedback in terms of the presentation. Now, I know change, as I indicated, can be very disruptive. And at this moment, we are all in the midst of uncertainty. And the idea of having to produce your best work in such uncertain times, I know can be a bit daunting. But as I would have mentioned, bringing along your team and just trying to look at opportunities that may exist, going back to the first principles and considering what is it that your business exists to deliver, and then looking to see how can you deliver in this changing time.
Okay, we're going to open up for Kristen. Kristen is actually our in-house attorney at law. She's actually going to share her views on our topic for today. So Kristen, you can go ahead and share with us.
Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. I thought the presentation was very insightful, especially because I think a lot of people right now are concerned in a way that suggests they don't think there's a way forward. I think a lot of people are thinking that their businesses are going to shut down, and that is a significant concern being expressed. And I think what we all have to do as business people, myself being one, I have staff as well, we all need to look at the opportunities that arise from these circumstances. There are opportunities that were never there before because now you have different needs than you had before. We all have an opportunity to look at our businesses differently and how we deliver the services that we deliver. And I thought the presentation itself made it quite clear the different ways in which you can do that, and how you can adapt how you think and how you communicate with your team, how you engage them, so that you can be just as productive as before. What people might find is that they can be even more productive than they were before if they can utilize some of the technology which is around them, and if they can create slightly different systems which are around them in order to facilitate the proper performance of their obligation. It should just be noted that when you are making these changes, at all times you need to consider how you're documenting them, how you are cementing them with the people with whom you're going to be engaging. So, for example, if you want to do business differently, whether or not it is an employee, you may need to consider third parties that you want to engage to help you in this process. And if you're asking them to help you, and for example, you're essentially creating an agreement as between the two of you as to how you can work together in order to achieve a better result for your respective customer bases. You might want to document that in writing. You might want to create a document that makes it clear who is supposed to do what by when, and what are the benefits associated with the action. So, for example, you have restaurants now that want to deliver food to people. Now, they might not have staff that's comfortable doing those deliveries, but there are multiple organizations that pre-existed this issue, and also some that have come along since then that you might want to partner with to facilitate providing that food to your customer base. And then the question is, how does that arrangement work? What is the fee to be paid? How is that fee to be paid? Do you want to negotiate it based on a percentage? Do you want to say, well, your ordinary fee may be $30 to do this, but because I'm providing you with volume, can you give me it at 10? These are the types of conversations you need to have with other people, but also the considerations you need to make for how you're going to protect yourself. When you are engaging third parties, talk to them about their safety procedures, and then talk to them about yours, because you need to be satisfied that while you take all the effort on your part to ensure the safety and health of what you are doing in relation to your staff and your customers, you need to make sure that any people that you engage with also are taking similar steps. Because at the end, if, for example, just a restaurant example again, if you engage somebody else to do deliveries for you, but their hygiene practices are not up to scratch and someone gets sick, the question is, who bears that liability? So it's just a consideration that we have to bring all the time in terms of finding ways to engage with others, finding ways to do business differently, but also making sure that in so doing, you protect yourself, you protect your business. For example, now you have other issues to consider. Suppose you do foresee that you might have a challenge with your rent, you may have a challenge with certain vendors. Now is a good time to try to negotiate with them from the beginning. Instead of waiting until you can't pay, let's discuss how it would operate if for some reason you were unable to meet that obligation, and then document that. You can, of course, at any time you can engage an attorney to assist you with that. But in very simple terms, if you have it documented, then at least you have evidence of some type of agreement between yourself and a third party. And that is where you should always start if that is possible. So I would encourage everyone to try to think broadly, but also try to make sure that you can protect yourself in the long term from any issues that arise. That would be essentially my comment on that particular aspect of the presentation.
Thank you, Kristen. I have a question. Let's say that you work in a toxic environment. How would you go about implementing or trying to have a mindset shift within your organization? Because we're working with employees who are very wary, or the comments that they would make. How do we, in this season, in this climate, how do you actually go forward with actually shifting that mindset?
So one of the things that is very important in a workplace would be trust. And if a toxic environment usually comes about because there's a lack of trust somewhere within the environment, and that is something that you're going to have to deal with. So I'll be brutally honest, a toxic, and that's one of the words that I would say came out really big in 2019. A toxic or very difficult environment, and then being faced with difficult circumstances, can only be difficult to deal with. But it doesn't mean that you don't start somewhere. At this point, I would advocate being as open and as honest with the employees. You're going to have to start to rebuild that trust, where you might need to go the extra mile if there's very limited trust within the organization. Start to identify the persons who are influencers within the company, and try to get them first on board so that they can influence the others within the organization. Start with them and then see if you can get it to spread throughout the organization.
Okay, we have another question from Facebook.
I did want to comment on that before you
Okay,
go on. There
go ahead.
are two things in relation to a toxic environment. The first one is that you have to identify the root of the toxicity as well. Going forward, you may want to consider whether it is one person, whether there are two people, and the extent to which you can address them directly to deal with that problem. From another practical perspective, I actually think that circumstances like this would tend to bring people together if you communicate in a particular way to them. So a lot of times people don't, as Sheena would have mentioned, it's a trust issue, and sometimes who they don't trust might even be the employer. When employees see that there's a genuine effort being made by the employer to continue employment and continue income, and they start to feel as if it's not just about you, the employer, but you're also considerate of them, not just the use of them, but the benefits associated with the business to your employees, then they might buy in a little bit more. They might become more trusting and more comfortable. And you can use this as an opportunity to create a team environment where the entire team must be engaged to make sure everybody survives. Because everybody couldn't. Everybody could have to go home, right? And everybody includes each individual. So if you encourage them to try to work as a team in order to get a common positive objective, then that may also be a good that arises from this situation, because they're forced to look past what minimal trust issues they might have individually to try to find a positive result as a group. So that's just a consideration I would wish you to have.
Thank you, Kristen. Our next question is from Facebook. Can an employer ask persons to work from home in a job that requires employees to make calls to clients, performing tasks which uses the employee's electricity and internet for 8 hours, and say to the employee that they, the employee, will be responsible for any increases the employee may experience in their electricity bill?
Okay, that was something we discussed, I believe, in our first webinar in terms of working remotely and some of the considerations around that. But the reality is, one, we are dealing with unprecedented times, so you need to have communication channels open and discussing with employees what your expectations are. But really and truly, employees should not bear costs for performing their duties. But how do you identify the cost that the employee has borne? So how do you identify that the employee has been using their electricity? How much of the electricity is being attributed to the business as opposed to the employee's home use? Now that is something that I believe is very hard to decipher, but I can see a situation where you compensate the employee for telephone use. So if you are asking the person to be on their telephone for work from home, then under certain circumstances, you may want to employ a use of a telephone allowance. But as I indicated, we did have a webinar on remote work and some of those considerations. So that is, I believe, is published. If it's not, it will be probably by tomorrow as we circulate the entire webinar series.
We actually have someone who made a comment. They said, you can check the cost of running a laptop for 8 hours with BLMP rates, which they checked it out. Also, internet. There are ways to provide SIM cards and hotspots for internet use at home.
Yes, you can provide those things for at home, or as I said, you can consider an allowance where applicable. But I know for many businesses, right now they are just trying. It's a rapidly evolving situation, and they're trying to organize as quickly as possible. So they will have to just try to work through those processes, and communication is key in working through that process.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of our webinar for today. We want to thank Ms. Sheena Mears-Granville for sharing her knowledge with us. Thank you so much, Sheena. And thank you, Kristen, for also joining us and sharing your knowledge as well. And to all the participants who are here, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your questions and comments. We do appreciate that. Do please stay tuned for our next and final webinar for today at 3 p.m. We're going to be discussing to lay off or not to lay off. That's the question. We're going to be looking at budgeting in uncertainty, negotiating with lenders and vendors, and then we're going to look at layoff as last resort. Now, given that we would have discussed, and this topic for this webinar was on business as usual, but with a twist, I'm sure most of you are familiar with training online, especially in this time where some persons are working remotely. Now, if you had a chance to see our training schedule for 2020, you would have seen that we would have posted some digital courses to be happening on our calendar. But in light of COVID-19, what we're going to be doing is going to be making some changes to that, and we're actually going to be offering some training a bit earlier than as scheduled. So if you're interested in doing any training with us online, please feel free to contact me by calling our number 435-4753, or send me an email at training@barbadosemployers.com, and I'll be more than willing to guide you. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining us once again, and do remain safe.